Greetings and welcome to the next episode of the Hourlings podcast project. My name is Martin Wilsey and I'm your host. But tonight, the leader of the discussion is going to be Dave. Dave, take it away.
All right. So we're all authors here and we all need to have conflict in our stories. Conflict usually means that there's going to be some sort of fight at one or more points in your story. And I haven't really seen a lot of books out there talking about how to craft a good fight scene, or even discussing some of the topics that I think are good background knowledge before you even start thinking about crafting a fight scene. So we're going to cover some of those topics tonight, and then we're going to come up with a sort of roadmap for how to craft a good fight scene. Now, I should talk about scale for a minute. We're not talking about big battles. We're not talking about World War II, the Battle of the Bulge, or anything like that. We're talking about maybe one-on-one, maybe a small group of people fighting another small group of people. That's the kind of scale we're looking at for tonight. So first thing I want to talk about is types of fights. And I group them into some categories: monkey dance, group monkey dance, attack from advantage, ritual fight, and a fair fight. So I'm going to go through a couple of these, and then I'm going to see if our audience here, the rest of the folks, can come up with some examples. But monkey dance is usually a sort of a male dominance fight. It's the kind of thing that you see in a bar, where two guys are pushing into each other and things escalate until one of them throws a roundhouse punch. And then they start punching each other and wrestling until the crowd pulls them apart. But nobody really gets hurt. It's usually just kind of male dominance. It doesn't mean you can't have a fight like that between women, but it's much less common. A group monkey dance would be going into danger with a group. It could be soldiers going on a combat mission. It could be tribal hunters venturing out to get themselves a buffalo to bring back to the tribe. It could be gang members mugging a tourist as an entrance, to prove their mettle to become a gang member. Attack from advantage is probably the most typical kind of fight. If you were gonna fight somebody, why would you want an even fight? You'd ambush them. You'd make sure you had 5-to-1 odds. You'd set it up so that you could win and there wouldn't be any danger for you. So that's a typical fight. A ritual fight would be something that has rules: boxing, a duel, even sometimes a bar fight. Let's take it outside, dude, right? And finally, a fair fight. In the real world is probably a unicorn, but it's probably the thing that we want to have most often in our books because the issue is in doubt. So given these types, I'm going to ask you guys to come up with some examples.
Well, I'd start with the classic, Western style bar fight. Somebody backs into somebody and spills their drink. That's a pretty typical classic kind of brawl. And the thing is even in one of those, if you're writing it in a book, you've really got to have good choreography. You've got to have it really set in your head. Really, who is there? What is happening? Because otherwise it's just confusion for a reader. So when I say bar fight like that, I mean, not just a Western bar fight, but it is that scale of fight where it may seem like chaos in a room and furniture is getting broken and all of that kind of stuff. But it's small enough that you got to have the choreography right.
I also think it's easier to pull off in a movie than in a book sometimes.
I like those kind of fights when there's a big entrance, the door bursts open, everyone gets quiet. This town ain't big enough for the two of us kind of thing.
I will say that I like the comedic amped up fights, like when Peter Griffin sees the chicken and they're like, and then fights ensue.
Well, there's a differentiator too. A comedic fight is actually different than a serious fight.
Absolutely.
because you sit there and you look at, I mean, I love the Three Stooges. I mean, it's kind of anachronistic, but when those guys are fighting, it was funny as shit. But you know, you're not really gonna be hitting somebody on top of the head with a sledgehammer in a real fight.
No,
I hope not.
Yeah.
Unless you're Thor and you're writing a Norse fantasy.
right.
Although one of the best fight scenes ever was in a movie called Streets of Fire. Did you guys ever see that movie? In the climax of that, they do have a grand, you know, equal battle with sledgehammers.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was really William Dafoe. You didn't see that movie? Oh, you gotta see it.
I recognize the name. I just don't. If I saw it, I have no recollection of it.
It's actually a rock opera, so it's good for two reasons. Man, it's got a great soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's got Amy Madigan. Oh boy, she was good in that movie, and everybody in the movie was really great.
Now, I think some of the fights we've mentioned, your bar fight, I think is sort of a combination of monkey dance and group monkey dance. I think it could be a bonding experience for the people in the bar, but also it's almost like a bunch of individual conflicts going on at the same time. You spilled my beer. You insulted my woman. You did this, and the next thing you know, things are flying everywhere. It's hard to judge where a comedic fight fits into this scale, because those are, I feel like those are more for effect sometimes than for actually accomplishing an objective.
Yeah, comedic fights. I don't know if you remember the Three Musketeers. They you know, in the 70s they had a great fight where the whole point of the fight was they were, you know, hiding chickens and stuff in their clothes because they needed some food. So another kind that didn't seem to fit in your category was like the worthiness fight. You know, okay, you can get through the door, but you got to get through me first. And you know, whoever, they end up getting in a big fight and they end up being best friends and stuff.
Interesting.
You know, I've seen that recur over and over again.
Now, that seems almost like a fair fight, but the objective is different.
Yeah. And in the end, they're both just really tired and they sit down and they, you know, share a flask of whiskey, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, something like Rocky is another fair fight. In fact, the whole movie is basically built up to that final fight scene.
When was that?
Rocky?
Apollo Creed.
Yeah.
Apollo Creed and Rocky.
Well, I also like sometimes unfair fights. Because think about the fight scene at the end of Blade Runner between Roy Batty and Harrison Ford or Deckard. That was a great fight and crazy, great choreography and stuff. And it actually, the plot kept advancing while the fight was happening, which is a really important aspect for an author. Try not to have the plot stop when your fight starts.
Actually, that was going to be one of my points later on. The fight should move the story forward, not be an interruption.
Right.
If it doesn't, then it's really not organic. It's more of it may not belong in your book.
Right.
And there's lots of goals that a fight can achieve. You know, it could be revealing the character of the combatants. That is a very useful tool to show you if they keep their cool, if you know how strong and competent they are at physical violence and stuff,
Or whether they fight
how willing they are.
Yeah.
Or like I said, fighting fair or not. That tells you something about a character too.
Right.
I mean, there's beautifully brutal fights in Fight Club, the novel. I'm sure they're also in the movie. That you know, authentic, because obviously this is no holds barred fighting, and it's all about the no holds barred fighting.
And having been in fights before, fictional fights are not the same as a real fight.
No, no.
Well, we want to simulate.
Kind of want to hear Marty's real fight story, but okay, if we're all against it.
No, I'm okay with this as long as it's good enough for the audience. I mean,
So I want to give you an example of an unfair fight for anybody who's seen The Guns of Navarone. Our heroes are going off on a mission. They're disguised. They've disguised themselves as people running a fishing boat going into enemy territory when they are stopped by a patrol cruiser. When it becomes clear that they're under suspicion and that the people on the cruiser are going to stop them, and we're talking about a small cruiser, but more people than are on the boat. In the space of about a minute, the trained killers that are our heroes take out everybody on the enemy ship and sink it. And just a couple minutes after the fight happens, there's no ship. There's no survivors on that side. And you realize for the first time in the movie just how friggin' dangerous these people are. That was a totally unfair fight. They were top professional killers going up against the crew of a simple, patrol vessel. It wasn't even a contest. And
that's all over the place with, ninjas. The super competent where it's a finger snap fight and somebody's decapitated.
Right. No, but I mean, a real fight is eye gouging, throat punching, kicks between the legs. I mean, that's a real fight because you're fighting to win and you'll take any advantage you can have.
Well, that might be a fair fight, and an unfair fight would be I just shoot you in the back from ambush and we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones,
Yeah.
Talk about
got a sword.
Unfair fights. He just pulls the gun out. And,
Yeah.
He doesn't care how good a swordsman that guy is.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great scene, impromptu though it was.
Yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm.
He had dysentery or something that day, and he was feeling like crap. That was
Yeah.
awesome. Classic.
All right. So we've got different types of fights, and we can quibble about what the categories are and stuff, but you can see that there are a bunch of different types, and you might want to choose the appropriate type for what you're trying to accomplish in your story.
Can I just one other that is sort of under a rubric that you've already mentioned, the underdog fight, which is, i.e., one of the classic fights is big tough guy, small little woman. She's live. She's got great martial arts skills, and she can win, and she does.
Well,
Those
sure.
are-
I would classify that as a subtype of the fair fight,
Yeah.
right? It's just that the people around them and the opposition might not know it's a fair fight.
Right.
Just like Apollo Creed didn't think he was in a fair fight with Rocky until
Right.
he was disabused of the notion. And that right there is actually kind of a cool trope that you see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some other topics that you don't see talked about a lot when it comes to fights. And one of those is what I call adrenaline. People don't really talk about what adrenaline means and what it does for you. So it's a reaction to danger. It makes you stronger and faster. It gives you raw power and speed, but it comes at a cost. It depresses what they call your usable intelligence, meaning you're so focused on action, that your brain is actually not working kind of at full cognitive capacity. It also leads to some other things like clumsiness and tunnel vision. So in combat with full adrenaline, you could walk out of cover, executing a plan, and not even realize that the German soldier is coming out of a doorway right next to you and has just spotted you and is shooting you, even though he's clearly in your peripheral vision. You're so focused you don't even notice him until he kills you, right? So adrenaline is something you don't really see covered in a lot of stories, or you don't see the effects. It's always the hero automatically executes a plan, a calculated plan, and never seems to go into any sort of combat rage or go into any kind of action that might be not ideal because of tunnel vision. So the way adrenaline works, and it's interesting because it's different for men and women. Men tend to peak with adrenaline early and may even get angry and go off into like a combat rage. Women don't have as much of an adrenaline effect, and they peak later in a fight. So it becomes interesting. A woman could actually plan her combat actions sometimes more effectively than a man, and almost plan her combat rage at the end of a fight. So I find that something like that, which I did use in one of my fight scenes in the story, can be interesting because men and women under the effects of adrenaline react somewhat differently.
David, I want to make a point there, though, that I think that in my experience reading prose for fight scenes, I feel like adrenaline is sort of overused. It seems to be like the go-to descriptor for, the beginning of the fight scene. Oh, adrenaline rushed through me. Adrenaline did this. Adrenaline did that. And I agree with you that it seems like people use that word, but then they don't really carry through on it. And it's almost like the word should not be necessary in the prose. Rather, you should show what the adrenaline is doing so that you don't really need to say adrenaline rushed through me. Show what the effect of the adrenaline is.
Right.
Show the
Yeah, I agree with
eyes
that
and the
because
focus and all that.
There's an adrenaline high. There's also a real adrenaline low.
Yeah.
When it closes down and you're like, oh, then you're like coming back to reality.
And then just one more point on the thing that you were saying, women and men, that adrenaline high that peaks maybe after the fight is over. The fight is over, maybe she won already, but she still got that adrenaline high. She might still be pumped up. That can happen.
In the fight that I did, I had her going up against a cold-blooded killer, and she planned a ruthless attack, and she didn't go off the deep end into like a combat rage until the very end, where she just simply couldn't stop bashing the guy's head in until somebody stopped her. But I never used the word adrenaline.
Right. I think that's reasonable. I mean, not that I think women are killers, but I mean, for your character, yes, that's reasonable.
So as background for crafting your fight scene, I think you can sort of look at that and go, well, how does my character react under adrenaline? The effects that we've talked about that are bad, like the tunnel vision and the clumsiness and stuff, those can be corrected with training. So somebody with military combat training may respond much more effectively to adrenaline and be more functional than somebody who flies into a rage. And you can use that. You would expect a military professional to perhaps be more effective in the fight than his neighbor who's a hunter but not a military guy, for example. So think about that. Another topic that's not covered very often is what we call cognitive bias. And that is, if you're sitting in a restaurant and you hear pop, 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 people don't actually think that that's gunfire. In fact, they'll go out of their way to attribute almost any other excuse for that. Oh, it's a car backfiring, or it's somebody set off some firecrackers. People in most places just don't expect dangerous circumstances to happen, and oftentimes don't recognize that it's happening, even when it's happening. Even when a guy comes into, say, a restaurant carrying a machine gun, right? They may think it's a toy or a prop or a joke. It may take them some time to actually process the fact that, oh my God, this guy is actually shooting people. Oh my God, I need to do something. Now, again, a trained professional, or maybe somebody who has, there are some people who react well under circumstances like that, even if they're not trained. Maybe they respond well, but your hero could be ducking while people at the table next to them are still gawking at the shooter.
Yeah, although we have said that. Well, Marty, I'm going to let you take this one. I think you've got.
No. I actually have this book that talks about this specifically. Title of the book is "Violence: A Writer's Guide," and it's not just about fighting, hand-to-hand combat things. It's about situations like getting mugged or shootings and stuff like that. And it talks about the reactions that you're actually talking about right now. It's called Violence: A Writer's Guide by Rory Miller. It's a really good book.
It is an excellent book. It's a great book for covering everything associated with violence. I don't think he gives a good roadmap for how to incorporate that functionality, the concepts into your story, but it is definitely awesome background for crafting fight scenes.
Yeah.
So cognitive bias, if you're untrained chef who has never heard gunfire in her life, reacts instantly and comes up with a perfect plan for defeating the terrorists coming into the restaurant.
No.
Probably not. You know, making her actions more realistic, more genuine, taking some into effect some things like cognitive bias and adrenaline and stuff, and showing us how she survives. That might be a cool scene. And with what we've talked about, you can start informing your fights with details like that. So now we're going to launch into a little bit more, how do you craft a fight scene? And it turns out there's a decision you have to make before you even start writing your fight scene. And that's your level of realism. Now, I have kind of a guide for levels of realism. So absurd would be the Three Stooges, or if you remember the rifleman from the 60s, where he always shot the rifle or the gun out of the bad guy's hand. That's absurd.
Oh, yeah.
That's where some of your comedic effect type stuff comes in as well. Antiseptic would be, say, The Princess Bride, where you see people get killed, but you never really see any blood.
Yeah, or the old cartoon G.I. Joe.
Yeah, it's PG, maybe PG-13, but probably PG. Cinematic, that's where I do most of my work. Good for thrillers. That'd be movies like Commando and Terminator. You do see some blood, but you don't see a lot of blood. You see people dying, but it's all very cinematic, right? That's where people fly backwards, and you get all kinds of explosive effects, and Arnold Schwarzenegger holds a guy over a cliff by his throat, things of that nature. Very cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
What I call pseudo-realistic would be something like Rocky. The point of which, when Rocky came out, Rocky was probably the most realistic boxing scene that had ever been put in a movie. They actually
montage realistic. Was the hype up and the rapid training realistic? That's a good question.
Probably not so much, but the payoff for the whole movie was the fight scene. And the fight scene was something that I personally had never seen anything like it in a movie before. It's more commonplace now. Another movie.
Yeah, did you ever see Raging Bull? Another great boxing movie.
Yeah. Another movie in that category would be The Departed with Leonardo Dicaprio, where gunfire is very realistic. You see a guy, you shoot, blood spurts, he falls. Very, very, very sudden, quick, violent. Oh my God, what the hell just happened? And then what I'd call realistic would be something like Saving Private Ryan, where the battle scene, especially at the beginning, was so realistic that some people threw up. So one of the things you have to decide is, how realistic do you want it to be? And I think that varies a bit by genre and what you're trying to accomplish. So, thoughts?
Yeah, and you can take all of those categories and amplify them by scale. When you're talking Saving Private Ryan and they're storming the beaches at Normandy, the scale of those scenes is ginormous. Though Saving Private Ryan had a lot of really realistic personal fight scenes. Where it's just two guys in a bayonet, and it's brutal. It really is brutal in its realism. It's a real challenge as a writer to convey to the reader what the writer has in his mind. You just have to do it and just let them have it in their own mind. um, and hope that they, you know, don't throw the book down and go, oh, he should have broke the leg off the chair, or, you know.
Right.
Well, and that's always a challenge. You simply can't do a blow-by-blow description of an entire fight scene. You've
Mhm.
kind of collapse it and give people an idea of how the fight is going and enough context so they can kind of see the choreography, but you can't go overboard.
And I think POV in a fight scene is so very much more important, because you can take the POV and tunnel vision it. You don't have to say that they're getting tunnel vision, but it's easy enough to show that they're getting tunnel vision
Right.
in the chaos of everything that's going on around them. And it's in fight scenes, I read a lot of books where there's a lot of head hopping going on in the fight scenes, you know, and that's not so
No.
not so clear.
We have done episodes on, you know, Third Person Limited. Go check them out.
So yeah, it's real, you know, the choreography, the, you know, what you're actually trying to convey, where your plot's going with the fight scene. It's all really important.
All right, so here's some ideas. Fantasy. What kind of what level of realism would you expect fantasy to have?
A little
Well,
less, I think.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
there's all this.
I love reading fantasy. Some of the best books about fantasy that kind of gloss over the fight scenes or whatever. Especially seeing you get more sword fights in a fantasy novel, which I love. Frankly I love them. You know, I have a story that is swords and sorcery, and it's heavy on the swords. What's that?
It is.
Yes, it is. And I did it on purpose. And I really enjoyed that. And I'm writing another one. So I think fantasy, you know, fantasy's got a lot of extra tools as well when fights
Absolutely.
happen.
You've got firebolts, you've got this.
You know.
But even if you don't go into the magic, you've got longbows. I mean, you have a sniper in modern day, you have a guy with a longbow who's going to pluck you.
I think it tends to vary for fantasy. I think more commonly what I've seen is antiseptic.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Then again, Game of Thrones come out.
I see a lot more, you know, fleeing.
Mm.
You know, get your punches in and run.
Yeah.
Thriller.
Oh, great. They've got a dragon, you know.
A genre like thriller.
Yeah.
I expect a lot of realism. Well, depends on what kind of thriller. If it's like a legal thriller or like a police kind of thriller, crime, then I expect a lot of realism. If it's like a horror,
You
that'd be
need the
different.
tension. That's the thing. With the thriller,
Yeah,
you need the tension.
I love reading thrillers. I think the fights in thrillers are often very one-sided and very murdery.
Yeah.
And you get a really, really big imbalance in them for that reason, because, you know, that's how they happen.
Military SF.
Oh, you got guns. You got knives.
Yeah, you got a lot of tools in there, which can be a lot of fun. And one thing we haven't talked about is the distance of engagement.
Oh, yeah.
When you're fighting somebody, you know, the tools that you have at hand dictate how close they are together. You know, it's different if you're fist fighting. It's different if you're sword fighting.
Or you got a
If you are a future soldier in full body combat armor, you're even farther, because you can deploy those missiles on your backpack, you know, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's,
I was thinking more close quarters for most of this, where it was, you know, man on man or group on group.
Not the sniper or the
Uh,
longbow
I think
bowman.
where the range of 2 miles is not much of a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fight scenes themselves, I think, break up into a couple different. Well, basically, I think fight scenes have structure, and the structure I see looks something like this. You have a setup in which you provide the context for the fight, what the stakes are, and what the rules are, if there are any. You have what I call opening moves, where the fight begins. The opponents start feeling each other out. If one of them is going to cheat or be tricky, that's where you might start seeing it. If the hero has a plan for beating his opponent, this is where he starts testing it out, and we find whether it's starting to work or not starting to work. The middle game is when the fight hits high gear. That's when Rocky's been pummeled by Apollo Creed, and it doesn't look like he might survive to the next round. Takes the hero to the edge, and you really see what he's made out of. It starts giving you some of the details of the fight. The end game is the conclusion. That's the payoff. If there's been any surprises in the fight, hey, I'm really left-handed. This is where it pays off.
Oh yeah, famous scene.
Any trickery, it's either happened in the middle game or it's going to happen in the end game, where the bad guy throws sand in the hero's face and now he can't see to fight with his sword anymore. Probably minimal dialogue, and then the aftermath, which I think is important, because the fight, and we touched on this earlier, the fight has to have consequences. It has to move the story forward. So the aftermath is where you find out essentially what the consequences were and how it's moving the story forward.
Yeah, I think a great example that fits your model very well is from the movie The Matrix. When they went to rescue Morpheus. It starts out, they walk through the metal detector and he opens his coat and it starts and it fits your model perfectly all the way through the end. And then the aftermath when they just casually walk onto the elevator and turn around and press the button. That is just like perfect example of like the most awesomeness of fights. Now that was a gunfight.
Yeah, but still.
So, but that it was just, it really showed character development and capability assessments in those characters in there, and it was just totally awesome.
Us a really good example there, David. Your fight with the woman beating the guy into a pulp. I mean, that's the aftermath. She's, the fight's over, but she's still fighting. And what are the consequences? She has to be pulled off. She has to calm down. I mean, that's an aftermath.
Well, using that then as an example, there was also some setup in the, he went to that fight. Well, I don't want to get into all the details of the story, but there was setup in order to get her into a position where she could take out the bad guys, for her to get a gun. Then the fight started, and it immediately went off the rails in the middle game. In the end game, it was brutal.
Yeah.
But she managed to win, and she managed to win realistically. Another one that people will probably recognize, that I like using Rocky because I think it's a good example. Most of the movie is a setup for the scene at the end, right? And it gives you the context. Rocky doesn't have to win. He just wants to go the distance. He wants to be somebody, and he wants to be somebody to feel like he's worthy of this Talia Shire, who he has come to love in the film. It establishes the stakes. This is what everything means to him, and the rules are, of course, it's a boxing match, so it's going to have the rules of a boxing match. It also sets up the fact that he is the underdog. He thinks it's a fight. Apollo Creed thinks it's just a demo. One of them is wrong, right? Opening moves, Rocky just about loses the fight, but manages to knock the the champion down, and suddenly we're in a different ballpark, right? It's a boxing match. It's a real match. They're both equal, more equal than anybody expected. The middle game, they're both pounding on each other, trying to take advantage of each other's weaknesses. The end game, Rocky survives to the end. And the aftermath, of course, is, he gets some respect from Apollo Creed. We're never fighting again. And, wins the love of the girl. Again, I think that's almost like a classic example of that model. Now,
Dave, I want to talk a little bit about what I think is the hardest fight scene to craft, and if you have any ideas for our listeners. I think the hardest one is when you have a group fighting another group. For example, if your protagonist is part of a motley crew or part of, the Fellowship or something like that, and they come across an enemy group. Maybe it's a band of orcs, maybe it's a band of the opposing kingdom or whatever. And the author then has to not only keep track of what the protagonist is doing, but what important people around her are doing. And then you have a lot of other choreography to keep track of and fights to keep track of that will affect her fight, etc. So what's your advice, or what do you guys think about how authors should handle that?
You got one of the straitjacket, third person limited. You can't actually be in the body of
No, yeah, you wouldn't. I'm not saying you would head hop, but I'm saying in the periphery are important battles that aren't just, I don't think anyway, should be degraded to just, sideline noise, because maybe it's like, her best friend is also fighting right next to her.
Yeah, that's where it shows how important POV really is, especially if you're going to tunnel vision a single character's POV and you're describing the rest of the fight because it's distracting to the POV character. That'd be a really great way to actually handle a group fight like that. It's a difficult one to do unless you are completely out of everyone's heads and omnisciently describing, the small battle that's happening, completely third person.
Yeah. What it really comes down to is a bit of staccato. It's like you're fighting and then suddenly you notice your companion getting a slug. You didn't see how they got there. You didn't see what happened. You just see that companion doing a slug.
So I think there's a couple tactics here. The first thing is I think you have to choreograph the battle so that you know how it's working and what's happening at any given time. And I've even gone so far as to do a spreadsheet with different columns for the different characters and what they're doing at the different points in a particular battle scene. Then you can do multiple POVs in a battle if you set that capability up in your book previously. So you could show the POV of one person, scene change, show the battle from another angle from another person. The danger of doing that is it takes you out of the immediacy of the battle. So you can do it, but you'd have to do it sparingly. Otherwise, you've choreographed the battle. So perhaps it's a sword battle against the orcs or whatever. And our hero manages to kill the two orcs that are in front of him. He looks around, sees that his friend is in trouble, and rushes over there to stab an orc in the back while looking around to see the state of the battle, and notices that the magic user has fainted because he's used too many spells, and it looks like the guy that's protecting him is having trouble, so he's rushing over there. You may have to filter it through one POV, and you can't show everything that happens. And then you can even have surprises. It's like, well, where's Joe? Oh, it turns out he was cut down in the first 30 seconds of the battle and nobody noticed.
Yeah, I think the aftermath is really important because you can convey a lot about what happened in a big fight,
right,
just by describing the aftermath through
absolutely.
A single POV.
Who's still standing. And there's another aspect of that, which is something that I've tried to put in the Time of the Kevins, which is PTSD. if this person has never been in a gunfight before and he's just seen all these people die, he could have flashbacks that could be haunting him for a while. I mean, there are consequences that can go through a book in terms of the aftermath. It doesn't
Well,
have
sure.
to just be one scene.
Somebody could suffer effects from being in a battle. I expect those things would take place after the battle.
Mhm.
It's possible that somebody could be in a sword fight and kill a bunch of people, and then afterwards, when the battle is over, they throw up when they realize what they've done,
Yeah.
because they've sworn never to take a life, and here they've just killed 3 people and they're covered with blood and gore, right? And so you can have reactions like that that reveal things about characters in your aftermath.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is you can chain fight scenes. So if you think about it, a typical book has highs and lows, right? So they have fast areas and slow areas. Your fight scene is generally a high. The aftermath is a low. You find out what the aftermath means, what the consequences are. You start having some more character interactions. The story continues to move forward, but it leads organically into the next, into the setup of the next fight scene as they try to conquer the next objective that they've got. So especially in an action-oriented book, you can chain the fight scenes and get some natural highs and lows. You see that a lot in like chase movies, and I think Terminator would be a perfect example of this, where it's just one long chase scene, and literally in Terminator, the fight scenes are chained.
And in those situations, sometimes I'll see a movie like that where it's just kind of like, either I get desensitized to it and it stops having its effect, or its value even, or I just get exhausted and I'm just like, all right, when is this going to be over? So I think in those situations when you're chaining fight scenes, it's really important to have a pulse on your emotional beats, your relationship beats, your subplots, so that it doesn't just become this whirlwind of nonstop action. I know that we often preach to new writers, pace, 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 keep things fast moving, all that stuff, and that's true. But there is a possibility of overdoing it where you just have nothing else but this tireless stream of combat.
And that's why it's really important that during the fights your plot is getting advanced. If you just have, okay, this another thing has started, and then another one has started, another one has started, it can get boring, and then
Absolutely.
suddenly you're got a reader that's skimming or skipping pages.
And I've seen books like that. I've seen movies like that. I think Terminator is a great example of how to do that properly, where you have 2 opposing forces, the Terminator and the good guys, and they are both working as hard as they can to accomplish their objectives. And you've got the emotional beats. And I even like some of the emotional beats are happening while they're being chased. It's like, you don't understand. He's a Terminator. He will never stop.
Yeah.
He will never.
Yeah, like the scene where Sarah Connor really becomes Sarah Connor, and she says, "On your feet, Reese," and he does. That's a really significant plot point in amongst the fight. It's a great movie.
And a classic action film. And a classic science action film, which is even better.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would like to bring up, though, in the topic of fighting is action figures. Sometimes action figures are your best friend. Sometimes you just take out the little Star Wars or the Legos or anything and say, okay, he's here, and then he's there, and they move around. Sometimes just visualizing it like that will help a lot with writing your fight scenes.
I think whatever works for you for that.
Yeah.
For me,
I've never had to use, tokens like that to actually do blocking. I may have, for instance, a drawing of a floor plan or something like that on the area where it's occurring, or a map or something like that. But I don't actually use,
Yeah, I think that's
action figures or anything like that.
Right. But if it works for you, please feel free to use it.
I think that's part of choreography is defining the battle space. And if you have to draw it, you have to draw it. Personally, I've never had to use a visual aid to choreograph a battle, but then my visualization skills are kind of off the charts.
So what else you got, Dave?
I think that is just about it. I'll re-hit some other points that I think we've made during this this podcast. That fights must do certain things. They must move the story forward, not interrupt it. They must reveal character in some aspects, and oftentimes not just for the hero. I like when fight scenes also offer me something unexpected. I mean, who can forget The Princess Bride, where the guy says, well, I'm not actually left-handed. Why, neither am I. It doesn't have to be funny like that, but I like fight scenes that offer me something unexpected. Maybe the reason the hero won is because he tripped, right? And I like fight scenes that kind of amp the stakes. I want to care about whether our hero wins or loses the fight. If you accomplish all of those things with your fight, then I think you've got something that really works and will propel your story forward and enthrall your readers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good show, guys.
Yeah, that's great.
I went a little bit longer than we normally go,
Yeah,
but it's a good
topic.
job. We'll see everybody next week with another fine episode of the Hourlings Podcast Project.
Indeed.
See you then.